Pennsylvania might
It's like
one member by the time he leaves, which
Yeah, that's true. Okay, all right.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. We will call to order this policy committee meeting of the Fredericksburg Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. Please rise if you can for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. At this time, I will ask for roll call and determination of quorum.
Teresa Graham.
Here.
Ted Ruth.
Here.
Matthew Kelly. David Brown. Bob Schneider.
Here.
Joe Stainsby. Marcy Parker. Here. Michelle Stropshire. Here. Lori Hayes.
Here.
Jacob Lane, I believe, is online.
Present. Online.
Chris Yakubowski.
Here.
Deborah Frazier. Kevin Marshall. Tim McLaughlin. David Ross. Meg Bomke.
Here.
Monica Gary.
Here.
Crystal Lanucci.
Here.
Tom Cohen. Daryl English. Adam Lynch. Matthew Levine. Oh, those are non-voting. Thank you so much. Quorum is here and roll has been conducted. Thank you.
Thank you, Coley. All right, at this time, I will ask for a motion for the approval of the March 20th Policy Committee agenda.
So move.
Second.
Oh.
We have a motion and we have a second.
You don't have a vote, right? Don't look at me.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Hang on,
Aye.
hang on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You had a request which I thought was forthcoming to amend the agenda, but I didn't hear anything. Do you not want to?
I do want to amend the agenda.
Thank you.
I am so sorry. If we could move 7B before 7A, that would be great. I have to
I'll
leave.
accept that as a friendly amendment.
All right, we have the amended motion on the table.
Concur.
Concur, thank you. All right, any further discussion now? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Thank you, Ms. Hayes. Moving on to public involvement. Comments and questions from members of the public are welcome at this time. Staff will also read comments submitted by the public prior to the meeting. At this time, do we have anyone from the public who wishes to speak? Yes, ma'am.
Fran Larkins from South Stafford. I live in the Salisbury community. I just wanted to, it's my understanding from, I've been on for a few weeks, it's my understanding that at your next meeting, you'll be bringing up options for proposed bridge rate 595. And I just would like to ask that this be, that's when you're going to have it, if you would hold it in a larger facility than this. So, and one that's probably maybe a little closer to our side of the community, because it's not really accessible to a lot of people to try to get down here. So we appreciate that very, very much. The other thing that I think I have mentioned before, at one point when I was on CTAC, we had name tags in front of each one of us, just a little, a stand. And it is, I know a lot of you all, but a lot of people that come with me as volunteers don't know anyone. And when you're speaking, it would be really nice to have a name tag, so we, or not name tag, but a name plate, so we can see who was talking. So thanks a lot very much.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at this time? All right, anybody online who would like to speak? Do we have any written comments? Please.
Yes. From Jane Leeds, we have an email. And she states, in order to establish a long-range fund specifically designated and limited to use for the means of providing light rail transit, LRT, in high-density locations throughout Central Virginia, a small gas tax should be applied. Will grow exponentially over time, since the state and local stakeholders never seem to be able to find funding for the creation of an LRT and travel programs. I feel it is up to us to create our own, as other cities have done. LRTs have proven that moving traffic away from high-density areas relieves congestion and improves access for citizens of all ages that are able to travel on foot, wheelchair, walker, cane, or with a guide dog, and those who cannot drive or afford a vehicle. It gives them access to employment, services, healthcare, education, entertainment, and shopping. It reduces the need for public parking at the aforementioned designations and promotes access to commercial vendors close by. This is a win-win proposition that will give better and faster access with a dedicated rail. This allows people to bypass local traffic and alleviates the backup of local traffic onto major thoroughfares and interstates. Long-range planning in order to obtain right-of-way for the rail station, sidewalks, and designated parking access to coincide with existing parking lots is necessary. Given the rate of development in the last frontier between DC and Richmond for affordable land and housing, it is important to start sooner, not later. Planning a LRT takes at least a decade to design, develop, and implement services. So far, we have nothing, no vision for the future needs of this region's urban sprawl. Like it or not, you can delay the sprawl, but cannot stop it. As long as we enable single drivers and do not offer a viable, affordable, meaningful, and desirable alternative to drivers locally, they will not give up their keys. What choice do we have? The VRE is not a viable alternative for local drivers, nor are buses, particularly for the aged and or disabled. Not all of our buses are equipped to handle those riders. Their routes are limited and do not operate on weekends. Not everyone who works has a 9-to-5 weekday job. Some work holidays too. The current diversion program is well intended, but not particularly successful or valued by the disabled age community. It simply doesn't meet their needs, and mobility options is too stretched to accommodate us. The issue of climate change and the vulnerability of gas supplies in the world due to war and sanctions also should be strong indicators that we need to change our thinking and how we commute. Europe and Asia have already made or have started this transition. The USA used to be #1 in the world for infrastructure. We are now number 13. That is an alarming fact to my way of thinking. The infrastructure bill of 2021 was a wake-up call. All the GWRC has planned to do is pour more concrete, build bridges and ramps to enable more single drivers. Commuter bus systems are simply a band-aid, a temporary fix of the use of using bigger, dirtier.
Thank you. I'm sorry, that is unfortunately time. For everyone's awareness, there is a 3-minute time limit on all public comments. Are there any other comments, Ms. Duzel? All right, thank you very much. We will now move on to the consent agenda.
For everything on the consent minus the policy committee minutes, because there's gap in the closed session discussion there, but so we can come back to that.
All right, so taking
out
up
the
6A.
Yes.
All right. So we have a motion to approve the consent agenda for items B, C, and D. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. 6, B, C, and D are passed. Item 6A.
I'll move for approval. We just need to figure out who the second, when we went into closed session,
Yes.
basically says they couldn't figure out because the mic had already been cut off. Who seconded the motion to go into closed session? I have no idea.
Who made the motion?
Mr. Kelly.
Matt Kelly.
I think I did.
You think you did? Okay,
Wait.
Mr. Yakubowski.
Mr. Yakubowski, so we'll amend the minutes to reflect that Mr. Yakubowski seconded the motion, and if you could approve them with that amendment. Need it.
Do we have a motion to approve
She made
with
the,
that
We
amendment?
already made the.
Well, I mean, well,
amending
okay,
it. Yeah.
okay.
Again.
Okay,
There we go.
good. Well, you made this, I thought you made the second for that. That's where I was wanting to make sure.
Any amendment?
Yes, thank you. All right, we have a motion and a second for the amended minutes of February 27th meeting. Do we have any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes. Thank you. Abstention? Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving on to item 7B. We're going to tackle this one first. The interim amendments to the CMAQ and STBG project selection process. Dr. Rideout.
Good evening. We have some proposed amendments to the CMAQ and STBG allocation process. But in addition, we also want to provide a quick informational as we just received the funding budget funds available for fiscal year 29, as well as the additional funds in the carbon reduction kind of pot. So we can go to the next slide. So we do now know the full outlay for our most recent call for projects for fiscal year 28, which we've known, as well as fiscal year 29. In addition, we have just under $2 million of kind of rollover funds from previous projects that have come in under budget or kind of swap funding allocations, as well as just over $1.3 million in the carbon reduction and the match that I believe VDOT provides. So coming into this next round of allocations that staff is going to be currently working on, we're going to be looking to distribute and allocate just under $13 million. We just got this information late last week, and so we're providing that update to you now.
Before you take this slide away, that carbon reduction line item, that is a new program we've not had before, and it is funds that were allocated in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So it is in addition to our usual allocations. This is a new funding stream, and it's so much per year, but because it's backdated to FY23, we have that larger amount of million plus match. So 1.3 million in addition. That's new money we've never seen before. And the annual allocations for CMAQ and SDTV have both increased by a small percentage this year again. So everything's a bit more than we had before. And then that big windfall that you see there for rollover CMAQ, most of that comes from the swap we did with the 5307 funds that came from the train station upgrades, which the counties were having to fund and which we put CMAQ money on. We're now getting the CMAQ money back because GWRC allocated those funds from the 5307 pot. So that's additional money also that we've got back. So this is probably, and I don't know historically before my time, but this is probably one of the largest amounts of money we will ever have allocated, that we have to allocate this round. Thanks, John.
Okay, and so what we are having to come back to do is small change to the scoring methodology. Currently, the way that this call for projects required that staff allocate funding was to go back and provide funds to anything that had a funding shortfall in a previous round. Unfortunately, in the way that it is wording, it says if the annual cost allocation or scope of the project changed by less than 10%, and so on. The issue with staff providing the allocations or developing a draft is it doesn't specify 10% of what. Was that the total project cost? Was it the amount that was requested by the jurisdiction or applicant for a project? Because if they are just looking for a partial funding, that would have an implication. Or was it something else? Like it was actually kind of an ambiguous 10%. And so we went back to both the tax subcommittee for the kind of methodology approach and to the TAC slide. And we asked them to say, okay, please define what this 10% is. And the recommendations that came out of the TAC and tax subcommittee was basically the 10% will be based on the allocated CMAQ funding for the project. So if it was a $5 million project that we allocated $500,000 for, it would be based on that $500,000. But they did put a small caveat. So anything that was a project of $1 million and under could actually request slightly over the 10%. So if there was a $100,000 project that needs another $50,000, they say, okay, as long as you don't go over a request of $100,000, it's okay for staff to go ahead and kind of put that in the allocation table. Projects over $1 million or going can go up to 10%. So that's again $100,000 before triggering up full TAC and PC review. So any project that goes over that 10% thing kind of has a trigger that the project is then kind of kicked back to both the TAC and the PC for approval, rather than staff go ahead and creating a draft allocation that's going to fund the additional requested amount.
Let me just pause there for a second. I want you to understand what's going on here. Methodology was rewritten last year. Discovered as we now try to implement that full methodology for the first time, there are one or two clauses where it's not quite clear what was meant. So two of them we've asked for guidance before we start making draft allocations. And these are the two. First one is this 10%, which is unclear to us, 10% of what? So we need to clarify that. And the other one is about some money that was allocated to the TMA, which John will tell you now.
So
We're asking you, hang on a second, we're asking you to approve those two sentences, that word, to put this into the methodology. If you don't do that, all that will happen is we as staff will be forced to guess what is meant, which means then everybody at the TAC will fight with us and everybody at the policy committee will fight with us because we have to guess, and if we guess a way that you don't like, then you're going to fight with us. So to prevent us fighting, we're asking you to tell us up front what the 10% means, and we'll do whatever it is. So this is the proposal from the TAC, that it's the 10% of the money that was allocated originally when the project was funded, and VDOT informs us, by the way, your project is now increased in cost because of inflation or cost overruns or whatever. Up to 10%, what will happen is that staff will, in the next round of CMAQ and STGB, allocate up to 10% more funding to that project. If it's a bigger increase, we can't just do a draft allocation. We have to come here and get you to decide. Do you want to tell the county to pay the difference, or do you want to take CMAQ or STGB money to fund the difference, or some other, we have other options for you to consider. So if you don't do it, we have to make the allocation anyway. If you do this, it gives us guidance on what it means, so there's less stress for us as staff. However, it's not an absolute cap, because if it's more than 10%, you can still give as much money as you want to the project. It just means you have to do it, and I don't have to come here and beg you to do it. I'm going to hand it all over to you and say, it's too much money, you need to make the decision. That's what that language does. It just gives me, as the chief of staff and the rest of the staff, a bit of a guideline as to what to do when a project cost just increases by a substantial amount. That's what we will do. That we'll bring to you for a vote anyway. If you don't approve that, we'll guess. If you do approve that and it goes over the 10%, we'll still bring it to you because you still have to decide. So it's not a big deal either way, because whichever way it happens, we're going to have to address the cost overrun. And we have got only the same amount of money, whether you approve this or not. It's just guidance to staff that we're going to put in the methodology to say, if it's up to 10%, just make the draft allocation and bring it to us for approval. If it's more, don't make the allocation. We need to discuss it. That's what that language means.
So one education there. So the way I read it, projects $1 million and under, that makes it seem like that's the project value. So maybe it should read more of projects funded with less than or equal to $1 million of CMAQ, STGB can receive up to 100,000. And then the same thing for the next.
it's actually based on whatever the CMAQ STBG allocation is.
Yes.
So it's not the total project cost.
But I read
Yes.
that as the project cost
Correct.
of 1 million.
So we will add in,
Clarify.
so we can add in wording now that says project funded
There you go.
for 1 million and under. So we're going to add,
CMAQ STGB,
we're going to put
because it could be a $3 million project.
Yes.
funded for 1 million and over.
And then 1 million under.
Yes.
All right, Ms. Geary.
Yeah, just quick question to clarify. When this language that's unclear, when was that put in?
So the methodology was rewritten at the end of 2021 and approved by you all in, I think it was the month of April 2022.
Okay.
It could have been March.
So it's just never been tested
March
since then. We haven't
2022.
had to. Does
It's
it,
never been implemented in a full sense. So this is the first time we're test driving it, and we're finding there are a couple of these little where we don't quite know what's meant.
is there anyone who was here then that would remember what the intention of that was? in the
So
language?
the whole TAC,
Just curious, like the full background.
the whole TAC was here then, and even they are struggling to remember exactly what was meant.
Okay.
It
Got it.
it sounds like just an oversight, and we were just not as thorough as we need back.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions on one? Okay, John, if you can do two.
So another item that was kind of missing in methodology is that we put a set aside for, depending on which funding pot, CMAQ or STB, for each one of the modes. So roadways will get 60% of the budget. Bike ped will get 20%, transit will get 20%, or 15%, studies will get a certain amount. We don't actually have a mechanism that says, okay, if there's no eligible project within one of those categories. So we actually have a category where we don't have a project we can assign it to. What do we do if we have that situation? And what the TAC is recommending, in a way that's kind of happening this year, although it could happen any year, is that the STBG active projects, which is normally a set aside for Stafford counties for projects within their TMA, so think Garrisonville area, there was no applicable project in this call for projects, but we still have to figure out what we would potentially allocate those funds for. So right now, the TAC is recommending that we park those funds, future call for projects, 1 year. So our FY 20 and 29 will be parked for a year to see if they're in the next round of applications, if Stafford does decide to submit an eligible project in there, to go ahead and score with those funds with that. For future years, if there's no other category that has eligible projects, those funds are then to be distributed into the other categories for that given funded year. Since this was not really a known item at the beginning of the this round of allocations, that was the TAC subcommittee and then the TAC committee later.
Okay, so we'll hold Stafford harmless because, hey, we didn't, no one had an idea, but going forward, we won't hold projects.
So for 1 year, we're being nice to Stafford and we're saying the funding is specifically allocated to the TMA, right? That's how it's designed in the methodology. But because they didn't have a project in this first round of using the new methodology, we're going to give them an extra year at staff level to come up with a project that we can fund, and we will then fund it with that money. If after that year they still don't have a project, it'll then be allocated to whatever other projects are available in other categories. In other words, you put it back in the general fund instead of it being specifically allocated to staff.
And in theory, you could even have a situation where, let's just say, roadways doesn't have an eligible project, where does that funding
We
go?
use the same methodology that if a particular category doesn't have a project, we put the funds in the general pot and reallocate it in future years. But because it's the first year, being nice and saying, put it aside this first year for 1 year, and after that we'll allocate it if there's still no project.
Yes.
So just for clarity's sake, so obviously I know we just received smart scale funding for the Garrisonville Road widening project from Eustis to Shelton Shop. And then I know there's a significant required local match on that as well. Is that a project that we could then make eligible under the local share potentially to receive some of these TAC funds?
So the FAMPO has given a substantial amount of money towards that project already through this process. I don't have the exact number in my head right now.
Which is only good for North Stafford.
But that, no, I'm talking about the road project now.
Yeah.
So that road project is already fully funded, including amounts that we've given from this fund.
Okay.
The set aside amount is specifically for active transportation things only. So it's got to be a bike path or a sidewalk or a pedestrian improvement. That's what this specific amount is for. It can't be used for roadways because it's specific. So the current methodology says we put X% roadways, I think it's 60% or 65%.
And 20%.
So much for transit and so much for bike and ped and so much for studies. That's how it's broken up.
Got it.
Yes, Ms. Hayes.
So, and excuse my ignorance of this, so we're talking about our projects, but what projects are we talking about? I mean, in Spotsy, like what projects would hit this?
So last month, your agenda included the full list of projects
Okay.
that people have requested.
Okay,
We unfortunately didn't get to discuss those projects in the meeting because the meeting ran very late. And you remember we agreed with
right.
you all to remove 2 of the items. So the one item we removed was a discussion of the CMAQ STGB projects that have been requested and the scoring that was allocated to those projects. That was in your pack. We then never got to discuss them. So they're all listed there. So if you just go back to last month's agenda and it's on the website, you can go through all their projects. in this particular category, it's for a specific set aside, which was agreed back 2 years ago, to say that because of the TMA, we get additional SDGG funding. Because we get additional SDGG funding, we will set aside a portion of that funding for the TMA to get bike facilities and pedestrian sidewalks and facilities in the TMA, because that's why we get the money.
And the TMA, just so you know, only includes Stafford County.
It's so,
Typically 610.
yeah,
Okay.
so basically Stafford County's TMA gets a specific allocation every year from now on in this, so long as we continue to receive that extra SDGB funding. And it's in that area that you have to select a project. But because it's only for the TMA, no other counties or the city can apply for that funding. It's a specific small amount out of the total, only for that particular purpose. And the only reason we have this clause issue is because the policy doesn't tell us what to do if Stafford hasn't come up with a project in that particular year. So we don't know what to do because the methodology doesn't say what to do in that case. We have the money, but there isn't a project. So we have suggested that for the first year, because it's new, take your time, spend a year, come up with a project, and we'll fund it because we have the money. Future years, we won't. We'll put it back in the pot and other projects can get the money.
All right, Ms. Bond.
So just for a little bit more historical knowledge, so Stafford was considering a number of years ago, going up and being part of the DC TMA. Okay, we would be a very small fish in a big pond. There was a lot of discussion about that, and we basically were saying, or people that were at the table then said, well, we're the one that is bringing all this TMA money down here. We need to be getting a little extra bonus or something for that. So that's what this is. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it's basically money that FAMPO is getting because of Stafford's growth numbers
Right.
in that area. And so previously it was going into the general pot at FAMPO, but FAMPO's only getting it because of that growth in Stafford. So it was really disproportionately impacting Stafford. Like everybody else could take the money that was really supposed to be allocated to that particular TMA. It was very contentious. I think the bylaws or whatever, the MOU with the
TRB.
that was me, Cindy, and Mark basically. And
Yeah.
every time we walked in the room, everybody hated us, but it was fun. But we got it done, and we got it done, and now
They asked me last week, the week before last, I went to the federal review of the TPB in Washington, and we were asked as FAMPO to come because of the TMA. And I said to them, it's my understanding that we are not looking to review that agreement again. We're
oh
happy
gosh.
to stay as it is because I didn't think anybody had the appetite. So
It is done.
if I misspoke, tell me, but I told
was not happy, but Spotsy had our back.
I told them,
Done.
I'll tell them we will leave it as it is. So what I need tonight, once you finish your questions, what I need tonight is for you to agree the language of those two items, which tells us as staff what to do with the money this year. And then there's one other item I just asked for your combination, but if we can just finish with this.
Okay, so Ms. Hayes.
So I don't have an issue at all with that because it's something that you guys doubt before my time. So I get that. But I'm just confused and I apologize. Knowing that, we're kind of giving you authority to go ahead and do this. And then if I heard you correctly, if there was money that needed to be added to that, it would be the locality's responsibility, right?
If a project cost has gone up because either DRPG or VDOT informs us that the particular project cost has gone up, what normally happens is if the project is in your localities, the person, either the state body, VDOT or DRPT or sometimes BRE, come to the county, the city and say, the project cost has gone up, you need to pay the local match portion of the cost increase.
Right.
And so what we're making possible through this system is to say we can, as FAMPO, fund some of that cost increase, right? And that's what this is all about, saying the burden isn't all going to be on the locality. Some of that burden met by FAMPO, CMAC, and SDG.
And I guess not knowing the specific projects are just something that I would want to know.
Well, it's not about any specific project. That's the whole point, is this is a
Methodology.
process for looking at any project that may come across the table. So this body is going to approve the projects that are going to go forward for CMAQ and STBG funding for all of our localities. And
all has to come back.
Yes.
yes, and so the idea is that as staff is reviewing these projects, and it could be any project out of this list where the cost or a cost overrun occurs. Could be in Spotsylvania, could be in Stafford, could be in the city. Either, doesn't matter.
My final comment is just please be aware that this policy committee makes allocations of funding and nobody else. All we do is prepare a draft so that you don't have to sit here with your calculator and add up all the sums. So we use this methodology, which is publicly agreed. We allocate the projects, we bring it to you, and then you discuss it, decide whether you agree with that allocation or not, and that we followed the methodology correctly or not. And then you make a decision to allocate that funding. So if you don't like the outcome or don't agree with it, it's your purview to deal with it. All this does is empower us as staff to know how to make a rough draft that is within the policy of FAMPO. And you then decide what to do with that. Right? So it still comes back to you to make the decision. The TAC and the FAMPO staff advise you. But should you not agree, and we've not agreed before, you make changes. It's within your.
Why did you look at?
I don't know.
Matt Kelly for a second.
So
Muscle memory.
right, yeah.
Yeah, that's Matt.
All that these do is allow us as staff and the TAC to know what is an appropriate, objective, neutral policy. Now, I'll say one more naughty thing, which if I was trying to undermine you, I wouldn't say. But because I'm always transparent, I will tell you. We wrote those with the subcommittee of the TAC. Everyone agreed. We took it to the TAC. Everyone was happy. There was a third one we were debating, but we couldn't get agreement, so we left it off. But we went back to the TAC at the very last meeting to say, can you now approve this so I can take it to the policy committee? It was approved, but it was not unanimous. Some members of the TAC at the last minute decided they didn't want to support it. I can't answer the reasons for that. They didn't say, I didn't ask. But the point is, it wasn't unanimously supported. There's no other alternative. No one said, we don't like it, here's a better one. They just felt uncomfortable at the last minute. And they didn't explain why. And there are TAC members sitting here who can tell you if they want to. I'm just telling you that because I don't want you to feel like you made a decision before you knew all the facts. The facts are the subcommittee drafted that wording. The TAC approved that wording. I'm asking you to approve that wording. But it wasn't in the final vote unanimous. That's just honest, right? Because I like to always be honest and upfront.
So yeah, sure.
But I do need a decision because otherwise I can't allocate this money by April so that I can get you the draft allocation so that you can think about it for a month and then approve it in May because I've got a time.
Yeah. So does that cover existing projects with partial funding?
This covers existing projects in point one.
Right. In point
Point two
right.
is only for new money.
Right. So this does not leave any projects high and dry. This is a policy that will apply to everything.
That 10% will apply to every project that we have historically. It's not, we don't play favorites with projects. It either goes to all or none.
No, I know. I would just clarify that.
That's what I'm asking you to approve. The one additional thing that I want to point out to you, and it's not on that list, I just think that I should ask you. Because we're busy with this river crossing study, which everybody's interested in, when we had this year's call for projects, I, as the FAMPO administrator, requested study money, not for current projects, but should the policy committee decide it wants to take the next step with the river crossing project. The next step would involve engineering and a NEPA study, right? Which we can't do as FAMPO staff. We don't have the in-house skills to do engineering and to do a NEPA study. So we would need funding for that. So what I did in the methodology, this one, there are line items which say that FAMPO staff may request funding for studies. We can't request funding for any other projects, for roadways and byway, only for studies. So I put in a request for funding for a study. I want you to know that, and I want you to decide also whether you're happy for me to do that. If you are, it will be in the pot with the other studies that have requested funding. Like there's an I-95 highway study that Spotsylvania have requested. The city has requested a study of William Street and to connect, make the BTR Trail ADA compliant by connecting from Lafayette Boulevard, etc., down to Duncan. Those are all studies, right? So it would be an additional study that's requesting funding. The reason I did that is quite simple. If I didn't do that, and you allocated all this money to all the other projects, and a month or 2 months from now, see the results of the work we've done on the river crossing study, and you then decide you want to take it to the next step, there's no funding for the next step. And you will have just allocated $13 million to everything else. But now you've allocated to it. And I didn't want you to be in a position where you're now trying to go and claw back money from projects you've just given money to fund the study. So I did it up front, right? And according to the methodology, I'm entitled to do it. But I want you to know that if you don't like that, you can tell me and I will withdraw that one. But then it means that when we get to the point where you do want to go further with that project, there won't be any funds until maybe next year when we get more STGB money. So I just want you to know that. It's a separate item. Those are the two that the TAC has asked me to bring you. But because there have been some questions about what happens to the river crossing study in the future, I'm just declaring that publicly for you to give me an opinion as the policy committee, so that if you like it, it's fine, we'll carry on. If you don't like it, I will withdraw it because I serve the policy committee, not my personal agenda.
Thank you. Ms. Bonke.
So I'll move for approval of these two items, 1 and 2. And also, I would like to have money allocated for future engineering and NEPA work as it relates to the river crossing.
We have a motion on the table for the approval of the TAC and TAC subcommittee recommendations, as well as the funding. Do we have a second?
We haven't identified, Mr. Chairman, identified a path. Want to study
So it's to set money aside that we could approve it if we so choose. So it's to go ahead and have that there so that when we get to the point of decision, we will have money available if we decide to go forward.
Thank you.
And what happens if you decide not to go forward, which you can, the money doesn't go away, it just gets put back in the pot, and then you can allocate it.
You don't have to do
one
a
of the other.
clawback.
Right, but then we don't have to do a clawback at that
So,
point.
That's what,
Mr. Chair, should we be voting on these items separately?
Yeah.
They're,
Yeah, I leave that to the policy committee to decide if you'd like to amend your.
I'm gonna withdraw that motion. First, let's address, I'll make a
these
motion.
two.
I'll move to have 1 and 2 approved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion, we have a second. Do we have any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Okay,
Yes,
so
Ms. Bonke.
Then I would like to move to set aside money for a future study, if a future study is warranted for the river crossing as it relates to NEPA and engineering, so that we don't have to go back funds.
I have a clarifying question. Mr. Ollis, in your comments, I think you said that you were trying to change the language or whatever so that you could bring to the committee to request funding to be used.
So the current methodology says, and it's online, you can read it, it says that FAMPO staff may request funding for studies at any point in the calendar year. So I put in the request when FAMPO issued the call for projects in November, wrote an email to John,
Yeah.
which is a little amusing, and I said, please would you include, and if you look at the last time I showed you the projects that were requested, it's there, but we didn't score it. So it is there in the list. I requested it because I was concerned that you were going to allocate all 13 million now, then make a decision you carry on with this project, then there's no money for it.
And how much is it? Just because we don't have it easily.
So all of the projects have got large numbers.
What is the set aside for the study?
So this study would require about 680,000 to do engineering and start the NEPA process. But, you know, the high capacity transit would be $1 million to do the study and the application. And the highway project that Spotsy is wanting to study to do the Harrison Road interchange is how much, John?
It was 1.1, I thought.
I don't have the exact number in my head.
It's over $1 million. It's the less expensive ones are the two that the city have asked for. The two roadway studies is one each of $75,000. So they're all, there's a range of project costs.
So it
studies.
seems like it's premature. I'm gonna remove my motion. Can we vote on this in April?
You can.
I think that it would be smarter to bring this back as a separate item if we can. Because there's not enough information right now. It's not really on the agenda as an item.
It's not. The action is already taken because I followed the policy and already requested the funding, right? I'm just declaring it to you so that if you're really unhappy with that, I will withdraw it. So really the request is, do you want me to withdraw?
Oh,
I think
well-
I think that what we're trying to just get through is that you just said we could appropriate all that money and vote at the next meeting in April, and then we wouldn't have money to fund the study. So I think that
Let me just
fusion is coming.
So let me just clarify that language. In April, I'm going to present, or the staff are going to present to you, a draft set of allocations for all the projects
And the studies.
and the study.
Okay, that's all we needed to know.
$10 million worth.
That's all.
That's all we needed to know. We don't need
Yes,
any more.
Dr. Schneider.
That's it. We can deal with it then.
One thing I would just, the project, you have the priority, have the asterisk that says that this is what it's gonna cost to fund it, or to study it. Have that as part of it. I know exactly what you're going through.
We will.
But from a decision-making standpoint, the localities, it's a question of how much to build it, how much to get ready to build it. And that's the comprehensive project, and that
We will have those amounts anyway, because when you allocate funding, you have to declare how much you fund allocating to each project. So we'll have the requested amount.
that helps to avoid the $1 million bus stop or the $75,000 curb cut, things like that, which is hypersensitive. So
We will do all of that. The only reason I told you is because some people have asked questions and I didn't want you to get mired in this thing down the line. I would, at your instruction, remove the request for the funding if you wanted me to do that.
No.
Sorry,
The intent
don't need to take any further action.
Thank you. And we're done.
Let's move on.
Thank you. All right.
We're good.
All right. So, thank you, Dr. Rideout. Now, moving on to the workshop on the linkages between land use and transportation decisions to support the region's consideration of long-range investment decisions. Mr. Wag.
Mr. Wag is over here behind us, and this is hopefully fun, right? Because now you've taken all the decisions, and now you get to talk about how does congestion work, and how can we fix congestion, because you all want to fix congestion. For your, Mr. Wag, Aaron Walker Associates, consulting firm, and has how many years experience in transportation planning, transit planning, land use planning?
almost 20.
Almost 20 years.
The founder of our firm, Jarrett Walker, about 30.
Okay, so, and Mr. Wag has done many workshops on congestion and transit and land use and all these related things. So tonight's gonna be fun. He's gonna basically provoke you to talk, and I'm gonna shut up and not say anything. So over to Mr. Wag, and he will hopefully get you to all think about what you want to do about
I'm ready.
congestion. So I'm gonna even vacate the seat. Have fun.
Okay. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. As Ian said, my name is Scudder Wag. I'm with Jarrett Walker and Associates. I live and work out of Arlington, Virginia. I lived and worked for a long time out of Richmond, Virginia. Worked across the state. I've actually worked with FAMPO in the past in the V-Trans statewide planning process when I used to work for Michael Baker International. Title of the my presentation that I will do later, actually transportation planning is freedom planning. But what I want to start you all with tonight is a game that we call Prairie Bill. So we're going to have you break up into groups of 2. However you want to break up, but I'm going to put a map down here at this end of the table, and then I'm going to put another map down here at this end of the table. You all can divide yourselves into a group of 2, however you want. Prairieville is a fictional city, and why think about a fictional city as opposed to your own city? Well, it gives you a chance to come at the problem and the challenge of transportation and land use linkages from a common level of information. You will have the same level of information about this place as I do, as each of your partners in the room do, that you have extra information that will take away from your experience. Secondly, it helps think about altitude. In any conversation about citywide, region-wide transportation and land use issues, there's a level of altitude we have to get at, seeing the picture from 30,000 feet of how people are moving, how people are connecting, and how the networks work, how the networks connect. And then, of course, it gives you a chance to think about these issues without your own personal interests at stake, your own individual interests as jurisdictional representatives, but your own personal interests of your neighborhoods, your own businesses, etc. So, welcome to Prairieville. This is a town of about 27,000 people. The grid squares that you see on the map are existing or future roads that are about a half a mile by half a mile. So each cell on this map is a quarter mile, square mile area, half mile by half mile. Think about that in terms of walking distances. That's a distance you can walk in about 10 minutes. So residents and jobs increase in density and intensity by color. So on the map, you'll see colors of blue and orange that indicate how many people and how many jobs are in each of those cells. Most of the cells on this map right now are green, meaning they're undeveloped. Blues represent more suburban type land uses, meaning more traditional, typical development patterns that you see in most suburban communities, where disconnected streets and completely separate land use types. So single family, multifamily is completely separate from commercial, etc. Shades of orange are shades of more mixed use, traditional town type development, where you have a mixture of uses throughout, more connected street networks and activities next to each other. Those grid lines are existing or future streets. So obviously in the areas where you already have colors on this map, that's the existing area of the built out place. And the streets that connect them. All of the remaining area in between each cell is future streets or roads that you could connect to new undeveloped territory around the city. And of course, some of these are existing and going. Prairieville is growing. Prairieville is expecting to grow and double in size, double the number of people and jobs in the next 20 to 30 years. And your job is to decide how you want to grow, in what form. So any of the light green cells on the map are places that you can build out and add to the development. The dark green areas are natural areas. You have a lovely riverfront down here with paths. And then up here you have a historic battlefield that you cannot develop onto. Otherwise, everything else is green is areas you can develop. Might be farmland, might be forest, but you can develop it. And you can develop it in any of the 3 land use, in any of the 6 land use types that we have on the bottom of the map. And I'll give you another cheat sheet. So you have 3 basic land use types that are more suburban in nature. And there's some pictures at the bottom of these maps, and there'll be some pictures on your cheat sheet that give you just a sense of the scale and feel of those places. So you have land use chip S1, which I will hit out as you go.
Jackson,
These
make sure you're inside.
Jackson wants a house.
You're not on mute.
Sorry.
That was great.
So this S1 chip that you could put down wherever you want in any green area, would represent a single family only residential area, about 4 dwelling units per acre, which means about 1,000 dwelling units per chip. And if you're trying to double your size of your population, you would need 9 of those just to make 9,000 additional people. There's no jobs. And the thing that will come up later is there's travel demand associated with that trip. That's about that chip that is about 1,000 trips. S2 is a slightly higher density suburban area, but still separated. About 75% residential, about 25% commercial, and about 800 dwelling units and about 4,000 square feet of commercial. And then S3 is a much more intense suburban development pattern, multifamily, and then your pretty traditional shopping center and light industrial commercial, but all again separated. And so that has a lot more jobs, about 1,600 jobs and about 800 dwelling units. Small town. These pictures just give you a sense of the scale of what the place looks like. Mixed uses of about 90% residential and 10% commercial here, and about 12 dwelling units per acre, so relatively dense residential. And about 500 jobs and 1,800 dwelling units. Medium town center is about 50-50 in terms of its residential and commercial split. Even higher density, talking about places that may be 3-4 stories across a good part of the area, and ends up with about 2,000 dwelling units and about 5,000 jobs. And then T6 is the most intense. You're talking, you might have 5 to 6 to 8 stories in some cases in this place. So 32 dwelling units per acre in the residential areas, and a sizable 60% commercial. That's about 3,000 dwelling units per chip and about 8,000 jobs. So a lot of jobs in those areas. So these are the types of development that you can choose to put down. And I'll give you a mixture that you can work with on your map. Your goal is to double your population and jobs, and we'll help you track that. We're going to put up a spreadsheet on the screen here. And as you put down chips, we will add up on your map what quantity of chips. There's already 7 developed areas, 3 S1, 2 at S2 level, and then 2 at T4 and 1 at T5 level. And that adds up to 9,400 dwelling units and 2,800 jobs, 2,800 people, and about 6,800 jobs today. So your goal is to get these to about 100% increase in dwelling units and jobs. The other thing to keep aware of is your jobs housing ratio. This is something maybe you've heard about a little bit from planners before. But if you have a whole lot more jobs than you have people, the problem you start having is the problem that DC has, which is lots of people have to come in from outside and commute in. So you want this to ideally be between 0.7 and 1.5. So if you put down a lot of T6 chips, you're going to have way too many jobs than you have people. Create such a question. So that's the basic outlines of your goal over the next 30 minutes to grow Prairieville or plan Prairieville's growth for the next 20 years. I'll ask you, you can have a 5-minute philosophical conversation about what your priorities are, but after about 5 minutes, start playing the game, put chips on the board and just start seeing where you go. After 25 minutes, I'm going to ask you to make sure you have all the chips down that add up to the right numbers, and we'll help you add those up so that in the last 5 minutes, you can make any final decisions about, I want to trade this for this, I want to move this there, and so on. Any questions before we get started?
No, but you have a typo. It's YOURE. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Thank
make
you.
sure you're happy.
I do. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Okay. You all ready to go? So how about you, do you 4 want to play on that map? And then
Sure.
you 5 on this map? Okay. Let's bring up the spreadsheet and let me give you all.
Am I with you guys?
Come down here,
Done.
take my seat.
Problem solved. You're welcome. Taxes aren't going up. We don't have to build new schools.
Well, I have family friends, and can we name stuff after me?
Yes.
That's one.
Jackowski Farm Preservation.
Go to Prayville.
Here's some S1 chips.
It's gonna be,
Don't need those.
you know.
Brought to you by. You gonna sell naming rights?
We just down.
Those are all
Okay,
good.
here's a couple of,
Chips.
Yes.
a
One.
little bit of philosophy. It should. One, don't put your downtown
First
battle,
there.
your battlefield.
And we'll build a Wawa.
Number one.
Jobs.
Number two, put your downtown closer to the waterfront, because that's where you have the commercial retail, retail development. That's where that's where people prefer the high rises.
So one of the things that I saw though, I really,
Elevation.
y'all ever been to Chicago?
So the
Yeah.
T6s, elevation,
Not North Chicago. North Chicago is fantastic. I lived in a neighborhood there.
et cetera.
It was
So having,
it was like a nice neighborhood, and then
want to have,
you have like a few blocks of that, and then you have some commercial,
not,
and then neighborhood, then commercial. That way you could have it a little bit more broken out, and it wasn't all going
otherwise you're gonna
all
have a
going to the other.
transportation.
It's really cool. It's called the Burnham Plan,
We
and
don't vote on residential
Oh,
development.
you want some of them, because they're gonna give you enough balance. You live in Schermerville.
Oh,
It's really, very, very bell curve.
No.
If that makes sense. You're developing an entire grid,
uh,
so
yeah, no, I lived in Chicago proper, like about a quarter of a mile from.
that's what's gonna tell you, okay,
Chicago,
that's my
Chicago,
downtown.
Virginia.
You've got one burgeoning already here.
The development pattern is
Problem is, it's already
actually
surrounded
really,
by,
you can live in a single family home and still walk to restaurants.
so you're almost landlocked. That center of the grid is almost
Yeah. No, like the family that I lived with, they had like a backyard and
Dead.
like they had 3 kids. You know, it was all very,
because you would have to zone above it, or what you would do is you would put your
and then we walked to a restaurant where we got served by a guy from Top Chef.
attic downtown flowing that way, and but if you go, you have to have that mixed
Yeah.
element in there, otherwise you're gonna get
PDR, everything, because we can't afford
Route 17 is what I was.
something
Yeah.
here.
The video game's much more fun.
So I like the idea of
Um,
towards the river.
Yeah, I do too, especially towards the corner there, the way that it's already set.
Yeah, and I think the blue, you're right, it's kind of.
What you need is better distribution
All to single family.
of the zones.
Build on top of it.
Right, and that's what's perfect for, like, if you do need housing, that's S1, that's gonna be close to the battlefield, there's gonna be less economic or environmental impact. So fight you is hard.
Mhm.
One of those kinds of
Have you
things.
developed
The proof of that is there are
industrial
houses battle
against the river?
Yes.
Well, I should have mentioned it. Don't put chips
So,
over.
like, there's real life lessons that you
Well,
can.
that's what they are, so we.
Oh,
can do
yes,
it.
you can do that.
Not have to.
I'm sorry, you're just trying to make sure you know what they are.
Yeah.
You're right. They should be five. Thank you.
Okay,
I apologize.
so if you've got all single family and
Go for it. There's some numbers over here.
what do you want? a-
P5, the green in the
Like,
corner,
why are
in this box here.
they are? The patient,
Talk about that.
like, how ratios.
I agree.
Just thinking this
Yeah,
was
because if we're
direction.
branching it out towards.
No, I know,
think
but he
he's
had
gonna
like
give
this
us-
whole.
Sure.
Yeah,
cheat sheet, I'm sorry, I didn't hand you that.
Need the cheat sheet. And feel free to ask if you're trying to remind me. So that's gonna give us.
How much is PDR?
We have to double our PDR.
How many do we have?
That's not on there.
Should know about PDR.
Right, and 5,000 jobs.
Here's your feet.
Thank you.
Okay, so just to clarify, what's on the board
It can't be one person.
right now, not the T5 one, but the other stuff?
It's the trade-offs. What are the trade-offs that we're willing to make? You,
Some of the chips there.
that's, I think, what all of this
Know
comes
what
from.
they are.
I know.
Yeah, but.
Oh, so we can't rezone them. can we?
Make them-
No, you
They
cannot.
are, they are.
Oh, we can
Seen this before, and it's specifically for.
Very, very much.
So, but just to confirm,
We can run.
Don't like it.
Yes, but.
I understand what the ideal.
just to confirm.
That's really high.
Could be, the 8 colored squares are 27,000. Like that's current, so if.
No, I color it's here. But I think
Seven's at 7.
You're throwing an extra
they're
T5.
gonna be,
So
and-
7 color squares
That's-
add up to 27,000 people.
because we do have a lot of real space and.
28,000 actually.
Not counting.
Do you have to grow?
Well,
How many people?
Redesigning.
Yeah, but we're a little bit left.
I'm not saying half the county undeveloped.
Heather, just for goal is again,
PSD is.
Double your
where it is.
double your dwelling units and jobs.
double the population.
Double the dwelling units. So we were already,
So
this is where it gets. can't do this level of algebra on a Monday.
I mean,
Do we want anything on them?
Do you want to?
Yes, you want your single family.
We'll add it up here if we have to.
Yeah, put restaurants at the river.
Yeah.
No, just businesses. Everything has to have residential. That's annoying.
Sort of link that T5 as built towards
I
the
would,
river.
I would put a small mix
Down
down,
with density.
so you do want higher end homes down there.
yeah, like the T4 or T5 by the river would,
Town center
T4 is less.
Yeah.
there.
All right.
You want to put that closer to the water.
No,
I
that's
think the
10%.
privacy does need to be closer to the water and
Oh,
maybe
T4 is,
change that out with,
Yeah, so you
What's
would want to
T5
do
then?
have 50,
kind of lead down that
Yeah.
way.
so do T5.
How intensive?
T5 here, so they
Not
are.
exclusive. I would, you don't want to go with a couple of single families in there too. Down here.
That is your downtown. And
Somebody better add how many.
He's gonna,
at
I think he's gonna,
every major city in the United States except
Just a nice sleepy little town.
they're putting down
on a river.
blocks and want to know, are you gonna?
What they do, and
They need to do
that
them.
is, we can do that for you. Hail water attracts tourism.
That is.
Water.
Just tell me. That's why I'm looking at that spot.
Quick math, does this get us there?
Yeah. Basics. So on the, what
I don't like
you're gonna want that balance, almost
Things everything.
looking at
So this is all.
Five. that is 50%
it's
residential.
3/4 single family.
Amazon.
But that's as high as we can go there, right?
The data centers. Where's the
Suburban.
data centers?
Oh, yeah, it's right, that's the,
Yeah.
So
cheap
Center right smack dab in the middle of the neighborhood.
yes.
So, I think kind of where we're going is we want the T5 close to the, maybe we can have
Yeah.
just outside of it,
So
fence a little bit away from the river.
I'd leave those two spaces closest in there. That's,
I would just
Where should we
assume,
put the R95?
from,
Mind if I just like?
I might want to do something.
I'd go on the other side.
We've got
No.
a portion, like we can have a portion of
Let's see what happens.
yeah, like
We build it, thinking this
And
is similar to.
another portion of for.
We're certainly
another
not
portion of
gonna
us to
put
try
this
to-
in the
try to
minutes.
space it out a little.
I don't actually know.
What?
No, I don't know.
What
I'm
about
just curious.
here? I'm sorry. We want that to be more. Single family.
Well, we don't have to do what's always been done either. We can do a more
I'm
environmentally friendly, less density next to the river.
Gonna happen.
I'm literally trying to remember what's
People to drive.
like in my.
I just think that the world has changed.
So
We
straight up-
used to build up around rivers because they were ways of transport. What is transported on,
Small.
on this river?
If you don't mind,
You know what I mean? So it's not necessarily that you have to have the density there.
sorry, everyone, can I just interrupt for 1 second? We're gonna mute the sound over there so people online don't hear every single comment, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, but they're probably gonna get pretty blue here pretty soon.
Or do you want them? We're
Muted.
just gonna mute the sound so that
Okay,
we'll
so
unmute it again just
here,
now.
somebody else sit
So
here.
I wouldn't. Now you're.
Where's the bridge to the parkway?
Jason, you.
I wouldn't do T.
Down here?
He says no, we all
I think.
Yeah, because the
But
good thing about.
I think one group's definitely done and the other group must be done. I want you to tell them if they've got the number.
Okay, it's economic.
We get the exercise, we get the point. We're not getting the numbers to make decisions, so let's just move on. They're done. We could spend an hour on this.
We're spending more time.
We're taking it very seriously.
Transportation and other things where everybody else is just, what are the numbers?
Yeah, so we're good.
Okay, so
MoveOn.com.
sorry, I had to run to the restroom there.
That's okay.
Here we go, everyone.
On your cheat sheet,
Thank you.
your cheat sheet for each of your land use types says at the bottom of each section, travel demand. Certain number of blocks. So how many blocks are there on an S1? One block.
One block.
Okay. So for each block it gives you, for each block it's asking you to put down for each land use type, put one of these blocks around that land use.
And these blocks are?
Around.
Blocks represent trips. How many trips? So for example, around on the edge.
White areas.
Like
Yep, in the
1,000
area around.
1,000 chips each block.
So each block represents 1,000 trips.
So
What about?
that's how many trips a storage unit makes in a day, so it could be fine.
This is peak trips only. This is actually,
S2 is 4.
No, do we put it on the white or on the square itself?
on the white area around the square.
Oh.
There's actually enough space that you can do it side by side on this.
Scudder tells me he tried this with his kids and the Lego blocks to make sure it works.
Very interesting conversation, by the way.
Actually,
Sure, I-
$15.
3.
Button for punishment. Appreciate you doing it, folks. Happy to talk more.
Yeah, we will.
Trucks on the road.
Ew, why did we put so many S3?
Seen what others have done.
Tackle any others?
Kelly's doing so.
Huh?
Actually, Kelly's doing all.
Okay.
It's just easier to work. You do all the work. Just change it to work.
Basically what the ask is if you're gonna do it, but don't do it if you're. Give him time to be able to take.
Yeah, I don't mind.
He never said I was wrong, so.
Everybody teases me. Should use Susan when she stopped.
That's a disappointment.
Well,
I tell her I need more.
I mean, you know what,
projects.
guys, how much of a hit is it?
Tells me that she's
And
got more money.
This is gonna happen.
Gonna get.
So if it's, depending on how it hit, what are you recommending we do if you don't want to be hacked?
I don't know. Do we have to do them up here still?
Just the one to be nice to.
Ugh.
I wish to be about people, to be nice to Susan, because she funds where the money's given.
How many is in the S?
I think there's,
It's not hard to be nice to people.
they need to sit down. Yeah,
You all strive to do.
We should be building the roads. She's beat.
they are doing a particular.
No question
of it.
No question. No one's.
Those P5s take a lot of damn cars and trucks, wow.
Mm-hmm. It's because that's Amazon.
Uh-huh.
That. Wait, we have 3 on that,
Seen-
on that one.
Have they seen what others have done?
How are you gonna fit
The
the
community? They must be aware of all that.
They are so focused. You know, it's
more.
trying to think.
No.
I understand. I truly do.
That's what I want.
They are so.
Coming. Well, I don't know, I've never seen this game before.
Got this thing about. HUD. Makes it hard to talk to them.
You all ended up with.
Talking about.
Not bad.
Have you got them all in?
You guys have had that conversation.
Couldn't get.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
So we just.
What's interesting?
See, we're gonna do boat rides.
Yeah.
Okay.
What's interesting, what's interesting about this hangout is that you've got near the river,
And it's there.
Right?
Yeah, there's gonna be a river crossing from.
I see. $400 million river crossing, we're gonna have to build right over there.
Boat ferries coming
Scudder,
off for their job.
we have to get a boat ferry and a river crossing here too.
Now, if we were to.
But you know what, if they have a T5 on the other side, then like this like nice pedestrian bridge, get a river thing going like San Antonio.
So, does everyone have your blocks on?
Yeah, I think we.
Great Parkway right here.
I mean,
Where's Fran? Where's Fran? Tell her we're designing Stellarbank Parkway.
Donna's pretty deep.
Yeah. Celebrating.
I'll meet with.
They're designing Virginia River Parkway crossing right up there. It's right at the river that they put in their model.
It's already there.
Bridge, right?
Talk to
We're trying to avoid it.
Marcy's got a highway connecting all the T5.
That side, so it's on the, yeah,
Other
it's on,
side.
yeah, it's on the south side.
I'm trying to avoid a bridge. You're.
No.
so
You telling me?
everyone has their blocks down. I would encourage you,
Over there, or did she go?
I would encourage you to look at each other's maps for a moment.
Bathroom.
Stand up and look at each other's maps. Just
So look at the other one.
walk around and look at each other's maps for a second. And one of the things, so one thing to note is y'all had fairly not dramatically different numbers in terms of land use patterns. You all use slightly more urban land use patterns over here. They use slightly more suburban land use patterns over there, but your total travel demand actually ended up coming out about the same, interestingly enough.
Do you see that?
But in part, that's because the group one, which is this group over here, had more jobs at the end of the day, which tends to drive up travel demand. Jobs produce a lot more travel demand on average than housing units.
We have a boat ferry, so we fixed our transportation problem.
So
And we've created a river crossing.
on an activity unit level, there's more activity units in terms of jobs and people over here relative to travel demand, but it's not dramatically different. The reason is you get more out of that here is that when you have more mixed uses, you tend to get 10 to 20% less external travel demand. What you did with the blocks is basically the first step of travel demand modeling, which is look at the land use, figure out how many trips come out of each area. And that's what those purple blocks or pink blocks represent, is that external travel demand of people trying to leave.
There's our bus line. I don't see
Wait a
it.
minute.
So,
You guys didn't put anybody down on the river.
Marcy wants to put a highway here between these.
We didn't
ones.
finish the residential. We got to the jobs and it's like, we got it.
It's a parkway right there.
Yeah,
And
we've got a.
It's a boat taxi.
so the other question to ask about these differences is, what does this suggest to you about the need for different types of transportation in each of these communities, given the different layouts? What does it suggest to you about the need for different types of transportation?
Lots of roads, transit will not be effective.
Why?
High traffic, you can't serve the passenger for revenue hour. The electeds aren't gonna fund, empty buses. That's an empty bus layout.
But let's step back from the jargon.
You know that he runs a bus?
I know that, yes.
We created jobs. We have a Republican.
Yeah,
I would never have guessed.
we have more jobs.
I'm independent, so I'm in the middle.
So why would this community be more likely to be transit oriented?
Because it's got your main corridors where transit makes sense going in here and around. It's very limited.
You have a lot of activity on a linear direct path.
And
You didn't put
You had
anything
Bob
over
on
here.
your team, no wonder.
He's just
I got
trying to
water.
side with the union.
Water attracts retail tourism. A great example of that is Greenville, South Carolina. It was a dead town until they decided to build around their waterfront. And the second they built around their waterfront, the entire downtown exploded.
So that's why you all built down towards the water. You all built down towards the water as well. Why is that?
Right on the water.
Because
Because we wanted a river crossing.
Okay. Is there a particular reason you all spread your blocks around?
Because
Yeah,
people like to be near traffic.
Bicycle in that community.
I got out
right now.
No, the
know what
T5, the point of the T5 by the river is, yeah, the highest, development there Because that's something that's going to be something that the town becomes.
Because you said we couldn't PDR everything, that's why.
See what I'm dealing with here?
So you went down by the river for the
For the boat taxi.
Yes, for that conversation.
for a river walk in the future, like San Antonio. Okay. Okay. Any other reasons for where you decided to put your growth?
No, when you told us we had the number, we just gave up.
Okay. Okay.
You didn't,
And this is also.
honest, we really didn't
Downtown Nashville. I'm sorry.
like a bus line. We didn't really
Yeah,
have that
it was,
conversation. We
okay.
didn't think about transportation. We were just thinking about housing units.
We were thinking about it. Okay. Yeah. And so this is actually this is not just Greenville, it's also the reverse of Nashville. So Nashville's core downtown is an L shape, Broadway and Second Avenue. First Avenue is right on the waterfront. There's really no development there because 50% of if you build on the water, you lose 50% of your retail due to the water. Like there's the bridge, like there's like you'll fall into the water. So business tends to develop one block in. So that's why we pushed the T5 there. The T4 still has its more residential density. So people living there, but we really targeted every other so that you don't have a situation like you have in DC where every building is a government building and it's empty. Instead, you want that balance of heavy commercial and then not far, lots of humans so that they can support the commercial businesses downtown while also having jobs. So then you reduce the number of cars that's still economically viable and you don't end up with a ghost town.
And you can ride by left space on the river for the gondola, I believe.
So let me jump back up to altitude here of just big picture thinking about if these blocks just represent that production of trips. How many trips are going to leave those areas to go somewhere else? So in thinking about what is your transportation needs that come out of these different layouts, what else comes out of that that's different from this? Out of that map?
Well, it's what comes out of it?
Yeah.
I mean, well, in this setup, the length of the trips.
Because you have so many, more of your destinations are farther apart.
Yep.
So you're going to have more vehicle miles traveled naturally. If both of these cities had zero transit, had zero sidewalks, and everyone had to drive, that's going to have more vehicle miles traveled because your distance. I mean, just that's the natural case, and that of course means more roads, more space for vehicles that you have to make, irrespective of any other decisions you make on roads. Proximity matters. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? This is meant to be a fairly quick game, and we did it in 25 minutes, which is perfect. What we wanted to do. Any other questions or thoughts about differences here? Obviously, someone wants to do PDR everywhere.
With all of those dense areas that generate lots of trips close to the river, how would you deal with the traffic volume there to get it? If you already have this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not you've gone ahead and added to it, but you start with this.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that dense area down by the river there? Because it's going to generate a lot of trips, and the roadways, I'm assuming, if this is a conventional grid, are quite narrow, and everybody's going to get in their car at 7 a.m. or whatever time to head to some other place to go and work. So those two roads down at the river are going to be congested as hell every morning and every afternoon.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas over here,
Oh, the GW Parkway.
be nice, nice and empty up here.
It's going to be congested.
Okay.
So I have a question that's not really related to this, but kind of an overlay. If you go back, and I don't know if you read our Freight Summit report.
I don't think I read it.
Very good. And
Okay.
it talked about I-95. I guess this could impact I-95, but our trucks on 95 are our biggest problem in looking at that report. The number of trucks, what get us to be the worst traffic in the Commonwealth.
connected to the bottleneck of the roadways.
Correct.
If the trucks had 25 different roads to travel on, it wouldn't be a problem. It's a problem because of the combination of factors, that you've got a bottleneck of the roads, but the highest number of individual trips of trucks anywhere in the state of Virginia that have to get through a bottleneck of roads, a limited number of roads. So it's the factors together that cause the problem.
Right, which is one of the reasons that I'm for some kind of a river crossing.
In addition, if you look at surface area, like for example, coming south of 95, when you get off at 133V, you have a massive parking lot that is full of vehicle deliveries. But you actually have a lot of large surface areas that demand a lot of truck traffic on your secondary roads. So 17, great example of that. Route 17 is just trucks that need to get to all those industrial areas. If you look at Celebrate, to get back there is moving through a quarry. I think a tire disposal area. If I saw that on the map, I might have misread. But it's to get to residential, you actually go through light industrial. So it's those examples of you're dragging your truck traffic into residential corridors and retail corridors because you have the mix. You don't have like this mix where it's jobs, commercial, residential. You have your industrial jammed in the middle of that. And so now you have your heavy duty truck volume clogging up those core roads that you have. So for example, this model doesn't have any industrial ratings on it, right?
This is a simplified model.
If he handed us the industrial park section over here, right, away from the waterways, away from the battlefield, and
close to the highway,
away from downtown, separated by distance, so the interstate can run between it or whatever. That's just that. You haven't done that in Spotsylvania, Stafford County.
And remember the other two facts that come out of that particular freight study.
Principally,
the one is that we have the largest number of trucks on the road of any region in Virginia, but the other part is that CSX moves more traffic than the I-95 and US 1 combined in terms of the volume of freight, right?
Correct.
So you add the freight on I-95 and the freight on US 1, CSX is moving more than that on the rail line. So that should tell you of the amount of freight that has to move through and to our region. It is vast. It's bigger than we thought. That's what that study tells me. We have much more freight movement in this area than anybody really was sitting and realizing because we didn't have the numbers before the study. Savannah, Port of Charleston.
And freight is it one of the reasons I wanted to focus on the land use question here is that it's something you have control over as elected officials in your local jurisdiction, the land use transportation conditions. So I want to do a few slides fairly quickly and then let you all have a discussion or have a question discussion about your thoughts about what you can do looking at your land use patterns. And I want to start by asking, how many adult elephants would fit into a wine glass? Drawing's not scale.
I thought this was a trick question when I first.
In 2050, how many adult elephants fit in a wine glass?
They're getting. Depends on what wine glass we're talking
We're
about.
talking about crystal.
Yeah. The one ever. Sorry, no.
I'm pretty sure everyone in this room is pretty confident in the answer to that question. And this is geometric knowledge, axiomatic certainty about the reality of what we know about the way elephants don't fit into wine glasses. So what I want to talk about transportation land use is things we know in the same way. We don't need data, we don't need experts, it's just basic physical space and reality about how things fit together in space. And technology doesn't change geometry. That's another fundamental thing. We know that a full bus, I know a lot of your buses here aren't full, but we know a full bus or even a half full bus fills a lot less space with the same number of people, private vehicles. Uber and Lyft don't change this equation dramatically, if at all. In fact, if we go and look at empirical evidence, we actually find it may make it worse. Deadheading, i.e. people just rolling around looking for people to pick up. And we actually have a pretty good idea that driverless cars are not going to change this reality, that everyone is still using a personal vehicle of the same size to take up the same space. And so it's helpful when we're thinking about what transportation technologies might affect our future to think about what's the problem and the solution. So communication, information about where we are, where we're going, how we get there. And that has dramatically improved in the last 20 years with smartphones and mapping technology and so on. With real-time information for transit now, it's vastly easier for people to figure out how they can get somewhere, and multimodal trip connections between and so on. Emissions and efficient use of energy is obviously a huge challenge. Electric vehicles look to be the solution depending on the precise form. Batteries are a big challenge in some respects, but we know that electrification is the basic answer. Efficient use of labor and safety. We know that autonomous vehicles will likely be a fundamental solution to this problem long term. Don't know when they're coming. Some people swear they're coming very soon. We're all very skeptical of that. The efficient use of space in dense cities is a problem that really only gets fixed by people using less space per person. Fixed route transit is one significant solution to that problem, but so is biking, walking, micro-mobility of scooters and so on, basically person-sized vehicles. It's just a fundamental reality of how much space we take up. So I like to say that transportation planning is freedom planning, because think about the wall around your life. Do we value freedom? Of course.
Absolutely.
Bristol, you don't
Will
value
humans in
freedom?
2050 value
It's
freedom?
America.
So think about freedom in the physical sense. Physical freedom is the number of useful options you can reach in a reasonable amount of time. If you can't reach a reasonable number of jobs in a reasonable amount of time, or you can't reach the reasonable educational opportunities, or shopping, or worship destinations that you really want to reach, if you don't have real options to reach those things in a reasonable amount of time, you're not really free. We all have only so much time in our day. So
it's a very interesting point that I've not thought about in this way before. It's a very interesting point that freedom is having access to those things. But maybe if the things are closer to me, then I don't have to go far.
So this is an example of that wall around your life. This is from some work we did in the Richmond area. This dot is placed at Regency Square Mall, if you're familiar with the West End of Richmond. And this is, from a transit basis, how far can you get in 45 minutes? You can do the same exact analysis by walking, you can do the same exact by biking, you can do it by auto, you can do it by whatever mode you want to choose. I do a lot of transit planning, so this is transit. So we often come to this question of how can we make people more free by transportation by let's invest more in transportation and get people farther in the same amount of time. Let's let them go faster driving, get them out of congestion. In the case of transit, sometimes just giving them the option because it's not even there. So this bubble has expanded because of a proposal we made about what you could do if you improve transit for this particular location. You could do the same kind of analysis of what if you built the river crossing, as you've been talking about, for autos or biking or whatever other mode might be able to use that. But the other side of the equation is we can also help people be more free by putting things in the space they can already reach in the same amount of time with land use intensification. So in that way, land use and transit are basic and transportation are kind of like the same problem in two different languages and solving the same sorts of problems in different ways. Thinking more about freedom. Those who would not defend the freedom of others deserve it not for themselves, Abraham Lincoln said. So one of the geometric challenges you face when you're talking about relatively dense places is that very quickly, if everyone or almost everyone has to rely on cars, then everyone becomes less free very quickly because of the basic geometry of space. And this is the same problem as the elephant and the wine glass problem. You can't fit a lot of big things into small containers. It's not a technology problem that you can solve with technology. So Do cars always offer freedom? In small towns and rural areas, yes. They are the primary way people can be free, physically free. Transit is going to be extremely expensive. In dense places like Arlington, where I live, definitely not. People have to rely on other options. And then in the in-between areas, it's also pretty much no. Because when you think about the situations where cars significantly limit freedom, DC, Arlington, there's just far too little space per person for everyone to drive. But even in pretty suburban places, Prince William, Fairfax, Loudoun, the places that you are becoming more like every day, the vast horizontal growth requires such long trips that it immediately and quickly fills up all of the space that you provide. And we know that road widening does not solve this problem either. In most cities and most suburbs, and even in your own communities, land is becoming very expensive. You're running out of easy ways to expand your roads already. And even if you do, and you have, you run into the two kinds of problems that induced demand cause. Induced demand, basically, the easier you make it to do something like driving, the more likely someone is to do it. When you expand roads and make it less congested, someone who said, I'm not going to make that trip because I know it's just going to be too crazy on 95 decides, I'm going to make that trip now. And then development extends further and further out. I like to think of induced demand in a very simple way. It's a thing that people think of as a very technical problem, but it's a pretty simple thing. All biological organisms want to do something and get resources with as little energy output as possible. I want to go to the store with as little, take up as little time as possible. I go to work with as little time as possible wasted. The easier you make it to do those things, the more likely an organism is to do that thing. It's a basic biological aspect of life, which is why we experience this in our transportation system. So you can create or prevent these sorts of problems for your children. Land use and transportation planning take sometimes decades to work out. So this is not a problem you're going to solve tomorrow. One of the things we typically see many communities experience, like yours, is you slowly grow from rural to urban. People's awareness of these realities of the way geometry is affecting their freedom tends to lag the reality of what's happening on the ground, because we all tend to operate in sort of a hindsight mechanism. It's hard to foresee this happening. And so planning, development, design, it's all based around the traditions that we've had in these communities for a long, long time, because that's just the way you've always done it. And so as you become more urban, suburban, and space becomes scarce, cars cease to provide that freedom, and then it can be way too late to retrofit for alternatives like transit, biking, and walking easily. So thinking about where can alternatives succeed, it's really important to think about a couple of physical geometric factors. Density. Higher density means a much higher likelihood that you're going to have destinations nearby that are walkable or bikeable in just a reasonable amount of time. It's also much more likely that you can serve it with transit in a cost-effective way. So the map in this group with that, dense pockets of T4 and T5 pretty close to each other, those density levels mean a lot more people would likely be willing to walk or bike between those places because of how close they are. You've got 4 in a line, that's 2 miles. It's an extremely easy biking distance if you have reasonable biking infrastructure. And that's a lot of people on a lot of jobs in that relatively short, small space. Walkability. Connected street networks. If this is a place you have a transit stop, or if this is a major node where you've got a lot of jobs, in a street network like the connected network, this circle is a quarter-mile walking distance, a quarter-mile flying distance, 5-minute walking distance. But along the street grid is this, how far you can actually walk, which is about 70% of the area.
That is one of our biggest problems in this region as also an outsider, right? Is that what works well is the picture at the top, high axis. But a lot of what we've got is that picture at the bottom, lower axis. So because the grid isn't fully developed for very good reasons, it's not like, somebody really sat there and thought, let's wreck it. It grows slowly over time. But it had impediments to growth, like the river, like certain other geographical features. So we've ended up with a lot more of lower access areas, as you see in the grid at the bottom, rather than a full grid, which you see at the top. And that means that we have to then keep widening the few roads we've got, because we don't have enough of a grid. So now you've got to take the 4 roads we've got and make them wider and wider and wider and wider, because everybody has a car. And it gets worse. That's some of the problem that we have, is that what would be great is if we have a grid, but we don't have a grid.
So lack of connectivity for alternative modes, and yes, it concentrates the auto trips that are using the network. That's really 2 significant negative challenges here. Linearity is another important factor that's really important for transit. If you have lots of destinations lined up along a main road where you could run transit reasonably well, a street you can cross, then a transit route can go in a straight line and it can pick up and drop off people, 1, fairly quickly, and 2, it might only cost you 2 buses to run that bus line with a frequency of service that's reasonably useful to a lot of people. But if you have to turn off to a half-mile long office park, go back a half-mile into a parking lot, over and over and over again. Number 1, it might take you 4 buses to run the same frequency of service that's reasonably useful, and a lot of people get out of their way. So for transit in particular, the linearity is a critical factor in the usefulness. So I just want to highlight an example from Richmond. If you're familiar with the west end of Richmond, this is an area near Willow Lawn, which is seeing some redevelopment in a lot of its pattern. And I want to highlight 2 particular areas. One is a giant office building. This is actually an insurance company office building built in the, I think, late 70s. And then this redeveloped area called Living Mill. This is extremely dense. This is about a 10-story office building. It's got a giant parking garage, has a lot of activity when people are coming and going for work. It's very dense, but it's not very walkable. You see it's a huge block pattern. You can't really walk through it. And it's not particularly linear in terms of access from around it, because there's not much of anything on this side of the street, and all of the major other destinations are down here. So it's way far back. This redevelopment area, which you can see being constructed, is actually mostly built out now, is also very dense, but it has a lot of walkability and connectivity inside of it. And it has a number of linear paths through the site so that transit could get through it if it were trying to. So this is effectively long-term an enormous moral difference in the way that these land use patterns will affect your transportation demand. This is always going to be a generator of intense traffic in its use. This you can build in, you can adapt to a transit and bike and a ped future. It doesn't have much transit service now, but it has the capability for transit to go through there in a clear, direct path, connect to a lot of places. It has the potential to connect to a lot of its neighboring, and is already connected to a lot of its neighboring development in reasonable ways that people can walk and bike to it in the future. And so another way to think about this is that this is a community that's resilient long-term. And this is an area that's pretty vulnerable in terms of its reuse, adaptability to different needs. So even in suburbs, I'd encourage you all to plan long-term for resilience. If it's dense, be sure it's walkable and linear. So avoid density that's more than 400 feet from a long-term corridor that you could put transit on, even if you're not doing it today. Think about those linear paths that transit could actually use in the long term. You can make streets more walkable later But if your built form is such that everything is way far back from the main roads, transit will never have a chance to connect to it in the long term. And it will also put all of your destinations farther and less walkable and less bikeable from each other. Also would encourage you to think about mixing uses and income levels as much as possible within your communities that you're developing. If you have a greater mixture of housing types in new development, you have a higher probability that someone who is working at the grocery store that's in that new development might actually live there and thus be able to walk or bike to work. So that can make a significant difference. And that's part of the reason why if you played this game and tried to put all suburban things down, you would see about 10 to 20% more trips on this map because of that separation of uses, forcing people to take external trips as opposed to internal trips, and build a connected network as much as possible as well. I'm using Richmond a lot because I used to live there and I'm very familiar with it. So I want to highlight the differences here. The color rendering did not come out extremely well, but this is the west end of Richmond. You're familiar with Short Pump Town Center, Broad Street, I-64. And in pink, I've highlighted here what you can't actually see on the map screen, which is, if you could, you would see this is a simplified drawing of all of the major surface streets in this pretty suburban community. And you see, it's a pretty, even though it's fairly suburban in nature and design and development, it's got a pretty well-connected grid of major streets. And in particular, if I go back, a number of places where you can cross the barriers like the interstate where there's not an interchange, which is particularly useful for biking and walking in particular, because interchanges are real big barriers. We compare this to Chesterfield County, western Chesterfield, south of the river. And here is that same basic grid of major roads in western Chesterfield. Far less dense of major roads connecting to each other. And if we lay those on top of each other, you can see the enormous difference in the connectivity of the grid, even in two places that have very much similar land use patterns, similar density levels. And that's part of the reason that you see traffic levels and potential for transit long-term is much higher in western Henrico, western Chesterfield counties, even though they've developed in much the same way overall.
And the blue one is going to have to widen their roads because the cars won't fit on those few roads.
So thinking about things like suburban development where you may not be able to put connectivity through cul-de-sacs in the long term. Building continuous bike ped paths through cul-de-sacs to main roads so that at least the bike ped paths are continuous, even if the auto paths are not continuous. And this is a very useful tool that gets used in many places in Australia as a way of maintaining some of that suburban form, but with the potential for better bike ped connectivity long-term, and then also makes it possible to reach transit stops much more easily long-term. Yeah. So ultimately, in most places that are growing as fast as you are and developing as fast as you are, there's not an alternative that provides enough space that everyone can be free if we are entirely assuming everyone has to use the car long-term. So unless you think that we can put an elephant in a wine glass, technology can solve this problem. And I encourage you to think about how some of these things might be able to apply in your communities, in your land use planning and long-term transportation planning to help address some of these challenges. So I'd like to just open up to thoughts or questions about things like connectivity and grid, or transit options, or land use policies, and that you might want to consider as you're thinking about the impacts of those on transportation network and travel demand.
So this is the end of the slides, right?
Yep. I'm done talking.
So I've got a question on the So at least in the neighborhood where I live, one of the things that was always really nice, so public transit, is limited. It was limited. We had a BRE feeder bus, and it worked with the timing of the trains. For a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of single family neighborhoods that exist today, they're essentially pipe stemmed off of major roads. Have you ever seen a bus, service that was able to use not necessarily a feeder route, but just something that could go through the neighborhood and then go to, a transit center of some sort, be successful?
It's pretty hard if your transit route is constantly having to turn into mostly single-family residential neighborhood that are disconnected and then come back out.
Okay.
Because if you're having to do that over and over and over again, someone who's getting on at the first residential neighborhood and then having to ride through each of these little loops.
Oh, I mean, the neighborhood would have its own, essentially.
So the challenge you face there is if you want every neighborhood then to have its own route,
Number of buses.
the number of buses it takes to actually provide service that's frequent enough for people to find useful is going to be astronomical.
There's an interesting neighborhood in suburbs of Chicago named Downers Grove.
Yeah.
It's a giant
Is
grid.
that the one you were telling us about?
No, I know. I mean, I live in Chicago proper, but I know where Downers Grove is.
It's a giant freaking grid. It's a giant, massive grid. So when you come off the highway, you know where the volumes of traffic are going to be. So what you do is you drive or you walk to that main line. And so you might be half a mile away from the transit route, but that's only a 10-minute walk. But it splits all the neighborhoods. And even though the developers basically built them in that grid scenario, everyone can walk to the center, and they run the transit lines and they take it to the either CTA, which is the
Metro.
the VRE.
Yeah.
So Metro, or they go to a CTA station, which is the true subway station with more stops and more accessibility. But Downers Grove is a good example of that, and it's been used a number of times. Typical suburban single-family households with Targets around the corner and all that, but because it's on that grid system, when they laid it out. Boise, Idaho is another grid system, Salt Lake City grid systems. So they have the traffic on the interstate, but once you exit, it really it's more like the natural flow of things. So it pushes through.
Can I, on that point, I've always had this question about when we start talking about grid systems, because from a traffic engineering standpoint, you look at a grid system and, if you have a problem, you can bleed out, things you can shift, move around. We had a neighborhood where we originally planned it, very large neighborhood, and to the point of this discussion, we wanted to put a commercial zone near it, so walkability, But then you had to go, it connects to two main roads. So immediately when we started bringing it up again, the question became, well, wait a minute, now all these cars are going to drive through my nice residential neighborhood and my children can't play in the streets and I can't do this and I can't do that. And then suddenly becomes a problem. So how do you, with its level of density and these issues, and we're talking about shifting roads around, and one of the things we've got to be honest with, if we shift these roads around and do these things, then more traffic is going to start bleeding out.
And correct this philosophical question, part of the challenge that we are facing in modern residential areas is you build that, but then you're attracting other retail to that corridor.
Right.
If you have that more consistently dense model, then there's no need for someone else to come to my Wegmans because they have their own Wegmans.
Well, that's hard in the current dynamic.
Correct.
Because, we're dealing, for the city of Fredericksburg, we're dealing with a city that is built before there's planning, zoning, and everything else like that. And trying to fit all this into it, creates problems and debate. So for me, it's more like, I agree with this. We have certain areas in the city where we can do this, and we should be looking at doing this. There's other areas in the city that, frankly, it's just not gonna.
So my question to the policy committee, because this is the policy committee, right? You're all the ones who set the policy, and then we try to implement it, and VDOT tries to implement it, and everybody tries to implement it. My question is, what policies should we be focusing on to try and alleviate the congestion that's coming in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years from now? Because we are going to spend money, right? VDOT will tell you, everybody will tell you, we're going to spend billions, not millions, billions of dollars over the next 40 years or however long it is. The question is, what do we spend the money on? And that's a policy. Do you spend it on building new grids, the new roads so that you can have a grid? Do you spend it on widening roads? Do you spend it on transit options that are better? Do you spend it on, well, working on changing your land use by convincing people who do the zoning to change how they do the zoning? Working on access to new real estate so you can put your industrial areas in different places to where they would go if you didn't intervene. Right? So what are the policies that we should be focusing on? And each one's a trade-off. If I choose to do X, I can't do Y, or I do half and half, some of X and some of Y. So all of these are trade-offs. If we build more streets to create a grid, we won't have enough money to widen all of the streets as well, right? It's a trade-off. You've got to pick. If we put in transit, we can't put in money to build something else because it's a trade-off. If we change the land use from X to Y, it'll benefit some and upset others. All of these things are trade-offs, and there's no perfect solution, but you guys are the ones who need to think through this and give us and the state partners and your own staff guidance as to where we should be putting the emphasis. Because once we've got some idea of what we want to do, we then have to think of projects that fit with those ideas. Now we have some projects on the go. We'll emphasize some and use a bad English word, de-emphasize other projects based on what you think is the right thing to do. So the whole reason for doing this workshop and the things we're going to do in the meetings coming is to say, hey, instead of just arguing about whether my project gets $5 million or not, let's just think about the big picture for one meeting and say, what should we be doing?
Let me phrase, if I can, another possible thing to consider, which is my understanding of one of the reasons you all want to just kind of discuss this as a big picture is feeling that your current transportation planning is leading you in a, you're getting numbers that seem impossible for what you may have to do to deal with congestion, what you may have to spend money on. And so my understanding is that you've been doing the basic standard transportation planning process, which is assume the land use is what everyone has planned it's going to be, and then figure out how much congestion that produces, and then figure out how to build your way out of that. So you can approach the problem a different way, which is to do bigger picture scenario planning, which is to sit down as a region and say, let's consider different land use scenarios and imagine what the transportation outcomes of those are as you think about what you want to do for both your long range transportation plan and your local land use planning.
We've done that one.
Okay.
We've done it a little bit once before. The difficulty we have, we actually, I don't know if you're familiar with Charlottesville and Albemarle County went through a great charrette a few years ago. And we went there to see what they did, how they did it. And they actually came up with a very good concept, you know, the node concept, get everything in and out, it's a need for transit, get it out. Because transit, let's face it, transit is going to be the way we go. We've developed to a point now where we need to look at it and use transit as it. The problem we have is we can't get together as a region. When we look at comp plans, I need to look, the biggest issue in the city of Fredericksburg is not what's going on in the city of Fredericksburg. It's 100,000+ people whipping through the city of Fredericksburg, going to Dahlgren, going north, going to Spotsylvania, going south. So to me, like I am now, when I look at our comp plan, I said, why aren't we looking at what Stafford is doing in South Stafford? What is Spotsylvania doing in North Stafford with regard to their development pattern? So we can start looking at what's coming to us. And we have to plan that way, to your point, a little bit more regionally than we do. Because we do have a tendency, it's my sandbox, don't tell me what to do in my sandbox. And we've got to get beyond that. Because one of the biggest things is if we're going to make transit work, and we have to make transit work in some fashion as we continue to develop, that gets us into a conversation that we've kind of tipped around and kind of gone in and out of, which is how do we run transit? Who runs transit? What type of level of transit are we doing? We have PRTC and company to our north. We have our own FRED system. Which do we do? How do we do it? I mean, we started with kind of a robust effort with transit, and then everybody started pulling out because they didn't want to deal with it, because they wanted to build roads. There's got to be a fundamental shift in mindset, instead of looking at Stafford and looking at Spotsylvania, just taking a map of PD 16 and saying, all right, in PD 16, in these situations, this is the way we need to develop. Because anything, and I've said this 1,000 times, what we do in the city, in the grand scheme of things, and we create our own problems on occasions, but it's us. The killer to us in the long run is going to be what's going on to our north and what's going on to our south and what's going on to our west and what's going to the east. What Stafford does on the other side of the Chatham Bridge in the future, you know, what Spotsylvania continues to do on Route 3 corridor and what Spotsylvania does in the Route 1 Lafayette area is going to have huge impacts on us. But we all need to start looking at what that is from a regional perspective, and not looking at transit as, okay, as a region, how are we going to run transit together? Because it's going to have to make it successful. It's not going to work jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Oh, we just want our one line here, we want our one line here, the city will keep running over here. It's got to be a regional system. And we're not there yet because we've not been able to have that conversation.
Development in those areas you just mentioned is not a bad thing. The bad thing is making the development happen and then not thinking about the transportation implications and how you're going to deal with it, right? So you don't have to be against development. What you've got to be is thinking through what that's going to do to the roads and to the transportation systems, and then planning accordingly to adjust your thinking about the transportation network to fit with the land use that you're approving, right? So if you approve more Amazon warehouses, okay, where are we going to send the trucks? If you're going to build housing, okay, where are we going to put the cars? You just have to start to think connectedly. It's not that development is bad, because I hear that sometimes, you know, oh God, we just don't want any more people in our county or our city or our whatever. Well, you can't actually choose that because it's going to happen. What you can choose is to adjust your land use planning so that you can accommodate or take account of the new people that are going to move into our region. And we're growing as the fastest growing region in the state of Virginia. So what now?
Well, Dr. Schneider, hold on, let me, Dr. Schneider first.
We're approaching the 2-hour mark. We can spend all night or stop soon.
Yes.
I can do both. What you asked the key question, and that is from a policy standpoint, what can be done? Part of that is last month I gave a presentation, and it was, you know, the first thing I said is I'm going to tell your baby's ugly. By the way, my baby's ugly too, so it's okay. Where I live, everywhere I've lived, because we live in places that are sometimes hundreds of years old, right? The key is, I'm going to argue from a policy perspective, is what can shift is an analysis of the transportation impacts has to be baked into the cake when someone wants to build the new whatever. A great example of that is Route 17. I use that. That's how I'm going home tonight. I will pass Mary Washington Stafford campus. I will pass the Geico. Is that Geico or Aflac? I can't remember. Okay. I will pass that. Does that belong there? That is a T. That's not even, there's no really mixed use. It's just all single purpose development. And so that is a vulnerable location. So when you looked at the development density standpoint, you built a highly vulnerable location. So if, for example, Geico gets the better deal to move to Arlington, that property is now collapsed and you have an empty space that they'll sit on for real estate purposes for the next 30 years. They don't care. They'll do as a write-off, they'll relocate their employees. Those are the kinds of things. So from a policy, what are the kinds of things you can do is start to guide the conversation of what's going to create the greatest risk. The other thing that I have seen in my profession that has driven me crazy, and this is my soapbox. So you're going to build the new hospital. You're going to do it on the cheapest amount of land possible, or you're going to build a new library, or you want to put in the new social services center. The county or the city doesn't want to spend the money to put it where the people are. You go for the cheapest land. So then you build it. Schools are notorious for this. You go, you find the cheapest batch of land, and then you build it there, and then you call us up about a month before the ribbon cutting. Say, are you going to run a route there? No, because you built it so far out, it's not doable. The flip of that would be, what if when Geico was wanting to build and the land was available, we said, we'll give you $5 million in land credit if you move it downtown. What would the impact be there? Or move it to a closer dense area. They're not going to worry about the higher cost of land acquisition. You can offset that. And you're like, well, why would I spend that money? It's a pecuniary tax shift. Instead of building all the roads and all the infrastructure, all the headache, you pay that, and now you don't have all the other issues. So those are just some of the examples that when you start to look at transportation policy, typically we are the icing smeared on at the end, and we can't make a bad cake taste good, no matter what you try, right? I mean, no matter what you do. So what are those core ingredients? Got to bake it.
Chairman, because we're almost out of time, could I ask that we ask every policy committee member for one thing that they think we should be thinking about doing in the
You just got mine.
Yeah, you've given us one thing. Just give us one thing of your first thoughts.
All right, we'll start here, Ms. Jakubowski, and we'll make our way around.
I need to say more than one thing. Number one, it was interesting you said about freight, how you move more freight on trains than you do on the roads. So then why are we clogging up our freight lines with more people on there for passenger? Why not take those trucks off, put it on freight, and then you clear up the lanes for people to drive on the road? I was on 81 this weekend. You know what clogs up 81? 2 tractor trailers trying to pass each other up a mountain for the next 40 miles.
Yeah.
Get them off. So we also romanticize this idea that we in Fredericksburg, and no offense to Fredericksburg, but your downtown area is really where your buses run. They don't run along Lafayette. They don't go into your neighborhoods. Short Pump also, horrible traffic out there. I drive out there all the time. So is Chesterfield. So we need to stop romanticizing what we want and actually look at what we have and start dealing with what can we do with what we actually have existing. Will transit work? No, it will not. I'm sorry, Matt, it won't. It will not run from neighborhoods. It was just said, neighborhoods will not. Swansea is most neighborhoods. We don't have a lot of apartment buildings. And the apartment buildings that we do have, well, we do now, they keep building them.
It's like, wait a minute, last time I drove through.
Oh, no, but if you break down the residential units, we have about 65,000 lots, and we only have about 6,000 apartment units themselves. Put that into buildings, and they're really in the high density areas. So we did do that. We actually put apartments at the VRE station with commercial put in there. So people can walk, they can bike, they can do everything. It's a bunch of apartment buildings next to the VR station with half a full parking lot. So these things are fantastic ideas, but I would much rather look at what are we actually dealing with? Why do people leave? Up in Arlington, how many people leave there for the weekend to go somewhere else and to be free somewhere else and to get into the mountains and go out to wineries and go to the beach and everything else? So people live their lives to a certain degree inside this little box, but they also move and go all over the place. So a bus will not take me to my travel volleyball weekend that I just did because there's no bus running there. It won't take you to soccer practice. It doesn't take you to every single place. So it's part of the larger scheme, but we can't focus on it. I really think it's connectivity. We have all of those roads. It's when you get off, and sorry to VDOT, I'm so sick of 95. We send all of our talent up north to go to good jobs. Then we wonder why jobs don't move down here. It's easier to drive up there. And once you get down here to our communities, I can't go over to Stafford. If I want to get up to 17, it's Route 1 or 95. Or if you go all the way around through the Chatham and up that way. We need to interconnect our communities better with Fredericksburg. Get out to Dahlgren. We need a connection out 17 over to Route 3. Now it's Caroline and Stafford, and you guys will have to fight that out. But take that connection out there. Get people out of only one way to go every single time. That's what I think we need. Sprinkle some transit in there, that's fine, but we're not at that point where we should heavily focus on it. We should heavily focus on how do we get our people around in our communities. And once you get off 95, roads work well, like you're saying up in Chicago. That's what my main focus is. And I'm not against transit. I think it's wonderful and fantastic. I don't use it. I don't really see a need for it in my own life, but I'm sure that there is a for it. But we also already have Fred. Can we re-examine Fred? And is it working how we want it to work? Is it doing everything we want it to do? So that's more than just one thing, but sorry, I've been sitting here for 2 hours, just like waiting to talk. So all right,
Ms. Bond,
go ahead.
Well, I have a lot of things rolling through my brain, especially because so many people are teleworking right now. And after they've been in their house, they do want to go places on the weekends now, which many people in North Stafford didn't want to get on the highway before. I'm thinking about VRE. Our numbers now are up to 6,600 people per day riding versus, what was it, 18,000, Dr. Schneider? We're never going to be, when are we ever going to be back up at those numbers? Is the government going to require people to come back in? And then I think about this freight report and, I'm thinking about downtown Stafford as I'm sitting here. The traffic on Route 17, the traffic on Butler Road, on the weekends, starting in the spring until late September. Everybody's coming back from the Northern Neck up Route 2, get on Route 3, jump around, come around by the Ferry Farm McDonald's there. We all know, don't get on Butler Road after 2 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon because everybody's coming through there. I think transit works in certain things. It is a little awkward for our community based on Geico that's already there. All these.
Along those lines, of a really important thing. Transit doesn't solve all problems, and I think that's one thing to point out. We do need to drive. I got here, I drove.
Right.
But also don't forget you've got the bike, the pet options, things like that.
Right.
You're right. You're a victim in a lot of ways by the outside forces here.
Right.
Really are.
And as Crystal was saying earlier, we're a Dillon rule state. We're only allowed to do what the General Assembly tells us we can do and below. And so much of anyway, I think that this was a very good exercise as far as for planning purposes, and maybe we all do need to work better together so that we can have these interconnecting roads, but it's not going to solve everything. And to me, just have to throw this in because it's really driving me crazy. Freedom is not having a digital currency in the United States of America. Want the government your checking account, then let this nation continue the way it is right now. So anyway, that's my last thought.
We won't solve the banking problems.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, obviously, we're only, like in Stafford, we have the mess that we were handed. I mean, it would have been great 100 years ago to have this information and then plan accordingly. But I think once you have a community like that, and then with all of the legislative restrictions, I mean, literally, we can't even ask a storage unit to put in a turn lane that says they don't need one. So it really does prohibit our ability to manage transportation challenges in a locality where things back up, where there's challenges. I mean, I sit at Shelton Shop Road and there's only one left turn lane. And I just asked our county administrator to have a study done because there's 2 lanes turning right and nobody turns. So, I mean, it's little things like that. Give the localities control so that we can address the community's needs on our own because we know what the patterns are. We know where the people are, what they're doing. And for God's sake, let us get a lot more money in transportation repairs from residential development rezonings. They sue us when we try to charge them transportation impact fees. So I think, if the General Assembly really wants to be able to clean up roads, they have to allow localities for how to deal with it. different than a city, so.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm going to agree that there is no silver bullet. There's going to be a lot of different things that come into play here. Transit is just being one. Two things. When Lloyd Robinson was here, and I'm going back quite a few years, first time we went ahead and looked at the comp plans of this region, and we were doing it with CLRB. And the idea was, we actually did this before Fairfax County did, was do an unconstrained plan. What do we need to put on the books to meet the current levels of development in our respective comprehensive plans? And based on that, we were $10 billion short of providing the basic infrastructure to maintain, not improve, maintain the current traffic flow of the region. One, we can't build our way up. Two, if you do just regional roads to reconnect things, remember what smart scale is. When they're going to look at little regional roads cutting and connecting, that ain't going to score very high. So unless we're going to find a way to put a load of money into it locally, that's going to be very difficult for us to do with the cost of land and everything else that we want to do. Right now, I can understand what everybody's saying, but when you plan for transportation, you're looking 10, 20 years out. You're not looking at it today. You're not looking at 5 years out. And at the regional growth level we're at there, no matter how many roads you build, and this is VDOT, which is amazing to me. Thank VDOT for this, but 2 years ago, finally came up and finally said it. We can't build our way out of this problem. We've got to look at alternatives. And we do. And part of that means that we have to look at, we've done it a few times, where we just take a map of the region, no political boundaries on the map. What moves things? Where is there available land to build things? We can go back and start talking about, sharing tax revenues if it is. It makes more sense to have this here, but we'll do revenue sharing or whatever else it takes. I mean, you're going to have to be very thinking outside the box to make this work. But that's what you got to start looking at to make this successful. And that, that starts with to Chris's point, if we're going to have transit, it really needs to be a regional discussion on where does it work, how's it going to work, and who's going to run it, and who's going to fund it. We've never gotten to that point. That's what we really need to understand, is start looking at one map, understanding that no, transit is not the solution, but it is a piece of it. But we can't keep, at the same time, we can't keep going down building roads, what we're describing, unless we're going to put a lot of local revenue into it, because clicking off just tying these two roads together and that road together so people can move more into the region ain't going to score very high in the old general smart scale scoring process, at least not in the current situation. And that's another thing we've got to consider, is what are the rules of the game that we are going to fund on?
Leverage funding.
But I think it needs to be a much more regional solutions, and we need to be looking at, again, every time we talked about development in the region, everybody goes, well, you can't tell us what to do in our communities. And nobody wants to tell, but we can have a conversation, and we had one with Spotsylvania County once. All right, you help us here, we'll help you over here, and we'll do revenue sharing on this portion of it or whatever else like that. And there's opportunities to do that, and we should be looking at all those opportunities.
All right, moving around. I think Dr. Schneider, we got your soapbox in, correct?
Good.
Good.
I don't have a soapbox. I agree with much of what's been said. I would just say the obvious. 5 or 6 years ago, who would have imagined that there'd be $1 billion of new investment on the interstate? So I'm grateful for VDOT and state partners for 6 new lanes of interstate traffic. I think we don't see the benefit today, but it's on its way. The northbound lanes are going to, I think, be a godsend and help flow traffic through. And more importantly, I think the third rail, again, who would have predicted that actually would come together with the state authority, rail authority. Long Bridge is underway. Third rail is going to, I think, be a game changer for freight movement through the community. So I'm not going to echo what I've said. I agree with much of it, but also think it's important to note that help is on the way with interstate infrastructure needs coming away.
Thank you.
Don't ever tell us to say one thing, because we'll all have 8 things, right? I'll be quick. I think the grid systems are really important, especially for new development. How that plays out and, what are developers really interested in doing in regards to that is an entirely different story. And I think that brings back into play that we need to lobby the state for more flexibility in having those conversations, which we feel like we cannot have at this juncture. because we can't for most of it. The multi-use paths, I liked the one diagram that you had up where it did show if you couldn't, build a road through necessarily, you could have a multi-use path coming through. And I've seen that in some areas where I'm actually from North Virginia, and Springfield is where I grew up, and I saw some of that, and it did lessen a lot of the local traffic that people were able to traverse without actually taking vehicles around ways where you could take bicycles or walk through those multiple paths. So I think that's something that in Stafford particularly we could make good use of, but it does require some funding. Transit, again, is not there's no silver bullet, right? It's all, and it changes. We could have a perfect system now for A, B, and C is what we do, and we get the state to allow us to do certain things. And then 10 years from now, it'll be different. But I think the transit is important. And to Chris's point about the highway traffic and the freight, that third rail that you mentioned is very important because, but we have to fund that, and if we do, and as we do, then that opens up capacity for freight to come off of the highway, because now VRE can use that third rail and not have to share so much with CSX, right? And so it actually impacts the highway as well. So I think continuing to look at all of it is really important, but working together regionally, as was mentioned, to, we do a traffic study. What's the development? What's it going to do for this block? And that doesn't even make any sense. What does it do a mile out, 2, 3? We're adding a load wherever we build and introduce new trips, and so it does impact the entire region. So I think if we work together regionally better, that would be very helpful.
So I agree that the General Assembly does tie a lot of hands, but there are also policies we have out there that we've constantly get fought against. So we already have the multiple connections in multiple directions, to where it's a requirement that developments have to connect to other or put stub outs.
Mm-hmm.
And we get constant fights from every locality to not. Nobody wants the traffic coming through their neighborhood. So I mean, what I hope comes out of this is that I hope that you all who have transportation minds, because you're here on this committee, go back to your other board members and convince them of the same thing. Because you all agree, but I don't know that your whole boards agree. And it is a constant battle. I mean, unless the county starts standing up to the General Assembly, a lot of these things won't get changed that are going to help us. But I do like the idea of, let's just take the whole area and take all the jurisdictional lines off and start drawing some lines to what would be beneficial to connect some, some areas together that would alleviate traffic on some of the heaviest roads.
I have one comment. I'm not a member of the board, but I have one closing comment. Imagine us being able to have this calm, thoughtful, clever discussion 2.5 years ago. Think about where we've come as an organization.
Well, there's a lot of different FAMPO now.
So, right? And yes, we won't solve everything tonight, and we don't agree. We have different views on transit, for example. We have different views on land use. We have different views on whether or not we have to force developers to do things. But my gosh, this has been one of the most important conversations we've had. And it's shown the massive progress that FAMPO has made to this point where we can actually stop and think and not fight about who's getting 500,000 for their sidewalk, right?
In April.
Wait, who's getting 500? You can have the fight, I'll just take notes. But the point is, I think this is great because we've actually now talked about the big things that contribute to our problem and the big things that could contribute to the solution. At least we've all talked about the same concepts, and in the future, when we raise them in a meeting, oh yeah, we know about that. We had this workshop, we thought about that, and maybe you have a point. Some of that we need to do, but also some of this, because we've had that discussion, and I'm really glad you spoke as well, just talking about the difficulties in getting development to add all these different bump outs and roadway connections and all that sort of stuff, because we all need to hear from each other. And I, Mr. Chairman, think this has been a great thing to do. We're going to do this once every couple of years, but I think this was great.
Not yet. No, I was
Chairman,
letting Mr. Ellis.
Over to you.
No, thank you. I appreciate everybody's comments. I would add, one of the first maps that we saw about how long does it take, or how far can you get in 45 minutes? And I think we need to think about that for all of our residents. How far can they get in 45 minutes, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, by walk, bike, car, transit, and start looking at that. And if we talk about actual like things we can do, that could be, for example, one study to look at the region and just say, this is how mobile these people can be or can't be, and start to understand where our problems begin, and which people can or cannot move around as freely as others. I think making sure that we are looking at everyone's needs equally and not trying not to be as parochial, to our own particular interests. I think it will go a long way, and I'm very grateful, Mr. Wag, for taking the time to come down here. Really do appreciate it. Want to thank you for that. And and I think what can we do as a policy committee? I think we can look more at a regional comprehensive plan. Mr. Kelly's idea about take away the jurisdictional and just talk about what does it take to get around this area of Virginia. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I also think we need to take a look at our zoning, all of us together, because one of the things we found, I think, more than anything with this exercise is that the more you separate uses, the more congestion you have. And so how can we add or combine uses that make sense? Obviously, it's not going to be the industrial plant right next to the house, but other things that we can do that make sense, that can build the community, and that can allow for people to choose how they get around. I think that's another thing that we can look at together as a single policy committee. So with that, we'll close out this item. Again, thank you, Mr. Wag, for your time. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Really do appreciate it. We do have to move on to other items now in the interest of time. Do we have any correspondence?
The 2 letters were approved by you under the consent agenda, so there's nothing there, Carly.
All right.
There's the letter you read out.
Okay.
I think that's it.
All right. Any staff or agency reports?
Just to alert you all that I've met with the chairman, discussed the next 3 months, what we have to do each month, because we've got to approve CMAC, we have to approve the UPWP for next year, we've got to work on a budget, all that. So we would like to suggest that we have the river crossing presentation at the May meeting, and that we ask VDOT if we can use their large venue, because that will provide the needs that all the extra folks who'd like to come along and hear that whole presentation. So if that's okay with everybody, that's what we'll do, but I don't have any other additional items.
Yep. So river crossing meeting is right now scheduled for May. So just everyone be aware. All right. Any further board member comments this time? Yes, Mr.
Just a quick question. Could we get a map done of the comp plans together on one single regional map? Land use, et cetera.
I'm going to say, in theory, yes, depending on how much information you want on the map, because every map tells a story, right? So if you just want land use, yes, we can work.
I mean, that would be a start anyway, just to see what everybody's got going with
Sure.
region on land use.
We can make a regional map of land use. I'd have to get files from each of your jurisdictions. So assuming they will give me the data, we can make a map.
I think it'd be a good baseline for the discussion.
I'll happily make a map.
Does anybody here have any objection to that? And so that maybe Mr. Willis can go back and say, at the direction of the policy committee, I was asked for this.
You want a motion?
No, just a just a nod, just a nod.
Good. Yes, please.
You will have me?
Okay.
All right. I'll ask for a land use.
Great. All right. Any other comments at this time? All right. We are adjourned.
Thank you all.